All right. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Data is Love. I'm really excited to talk this morning with Katrina Jones. All things people managers, what their experiences are, how they're supporting people, and the conversation that I feel like we're not having nearly enough of, which is the burnout that people managers are experiencing and have been experiencing for the last 2 years. So, Katrina, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to just start with having you share a little bit of your career journey because I
Yeah,
feel like your pathway from nonprofits to corporate is
yeah,
so interesting. And
yeah,
tell us, like, what are you excited about these days?
yeah. So, full disclosure, I am in an airport lounge. I am traveling to my first in-person conference in 2+ years to speak at HR Transform on a panel about cancel culture and how we move from cancel culture to communal accountability. So, thank you, one, for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you. A little bit about my path. I was intentional. I was drawn to HR. So before moving into DEI explicitly, I was an HR practitioner, and I was drawn to it because I loved, one, through the recruiting and talent acquisition process. I was thinking about the art and science of how you identify talent and make them match with an organization. But then, of course, I was also thinking more deeply about once people join an organization, how does you make sure, and how does an organization support all of their needs? And knowing that people are at different points in their careers, they have different needs. If you are, early on in your career to midpoint and striving to maybe at the tail end, that you're going to need different things, and that's a lot to balance. And creating an organization where people can thrive. And so my first HR proper role was with the federal government. And then I moved to work as an HR manager for a nonprofit called Year Up. And from there, again, always being intentional throughout my career and moving into the for profit space and working in tech within HR, which again, I loved. I love the complexity of it. My specialties were, of course, employee relations, but also architecting talent management processes and strategy for how you manage talent throughout the employee life cycle. And I always applied a lens of equity and inclusion to the work because that is something that I brought into it through my personal experience as well as through my academic experience. And along the way, I did all of the things in terms of I got my master's in HR management, I got, my PHR, I earned different certifications and different tools and things like that. And so the continuous education was always really helpful. And then I had an opportunity to shift into DEI, and I always resisted specializing because I wanted to become a CHRO, and that was my original career goal. And the universe pulls you in different directions. And so I made the leap and have not looked back. Although now, and I've, have gone in my career from HR into specializing in DEI as a DEI practitioner, internal, in-house, to now a full-time entrepreneur as a DEI and talent consultant who works with companies that are growing and scaling to connect their programmatic efforts into defined and comprehensive DEI strategies that help accelerate their path to increase representation and diversity and to close equity and inclusion gaps, and foster and build more psychologically safe and healthy organizational cultures. And I love the work of being an entrepreneur now. It's exciting. It's scary, and it stretches me in really amazing ways that I'm grateful for.
Yeah, being an entrepreneur, it's a mixed bag, right? Like
Yes,
depending on the day that you wake up, you're like, is today the day that I feel like I'm like
yes,
soaring, or is today the day that I want to quit and become a barista?
yes.
Or right?
Yes. I totally feel you. There are days where I'm thinking about, and people probably don't know this. One of the early careers I had was as a makeup artist. But every now and then I'm like, maybe I should go back to that. that was that was fun. That was creative. Like, why not? Am I sure about this? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've been in the DEI space for a little while, right? Really deeply specialized, but you've been in HR for a really long time.
Yeah.
I'm curious, who are you learning from? Because our world, I feel like, is moving so fast.
Yeah. Yes. I love this question because one, I love learning and constant curious, and that's been really important to me, just to make sure that I stay in a space of always listening, learning, willing to be challenged and grow. Um, I mentioned I'm heading to HR Transform, so I'm super excited about that, to be in person and learn in that way. Some of the people that I learn from in this space and really learn so much from, Michelle Kim, who has a book called The Wake Up. She is amazing. Nicole Sanchez, who is an OG practitioner. She has her own consulting firm, and she's been exploring organizational management. Really interesting stuff. Carla Montesero, who is the former CEO of Code 2040, she's done some really great work around power within
Mm-hmm.
organizations that I still keep coming back to because I keep picking up different things from her posts around power and the work that she's done around organizational power. Let's see. Uh, Better Allies newsletter. So Karen Caitlin has a weekly newsletter, Better Allies. That is a great resource, and she usually sources from different folks that she follows. So that's a great way for me to also connect and say, oh, maybe I should follow this person. Here's a new tip that I learned. Love that. Also, the Anti-Racism Daily newsletter, so good. And Alaria newsletter. And I would be remiss if I did not say, and me.
And yours,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I tweet. I tweet. I'll say a lot on some days.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of you know interesting threads and relevant updates about DEI, but also about HR, how people are navigating through the Great Resignation and things like that. Anything that's interesting. So yeah.
Oh, I love talking to other practitioners about where they're learning from, because
Yes.
I feel like when the world looks at us from the outside, they really think of us as a monolith.
Yeah.
And even in this space, I'm like, there are two resources that you just named that I have never even heard of. And I know that
Yeah.
I'm gonna be signing up for that Better Allies newsletter.
Yes. Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Okay, I want to get to the meat of the conversation, right? Around people
Yes.
managers. I've been one, you've been one. You've
Yes.
supported many as a DEI practitioner and as well as an HR practitioner. How are they doing? What are you noticing? How are people
Ooh.
managers doing these
Oh.
days?
Oh. This people managing is always hard. So the job is always difficult, and I cannot think of a more difficult time to be a people manager than the time of now, because they're
Hmm.
managing a team. People managers are managing their teams during one of the most turbulent periods in
Yeah.
recent times. There's
Hmm.
a global pandemic, racial justice reckoning, the Great Resignation, a war, and everything feels so fragile, right? And we're all simultaneously navigating these multiple, complex, multi-layered tragedies. And so the job has been compounded by this everything that we're all experiencing right now. And so people managers are really struggling. There was a study from Prudential Financial recently that found that 6 in 10 managers say their mental health has been hurt by the pandemic and managing, of course, during the pandemic, because you're also, you are responsible for the care and feeding, as a former manager of mine used to say, for the care and feeding of your team, for for the care and feeding of your team and meeting outcomes and specific deliverables, all in the midst of this incredibly stressful moment, an incredibly stressful environment. They're also managing through a hybrid. For some folks, they might be managing a completely remote team, a hybrid team, or even in person, which has its own difficulties and complexities. And so they're struggling to do that, but also to care for themselves in this moment, which is why you see, like that stat from Prudential Financial about the mental health, managers' mental health fraying, that managers are prioritizing their mental health over their career, and trying to make those calculations about what do I do for me, what do I do for the team, what do I have to do for my org, and just everything that comes along with that. So it's, people are incredibly burnt out right now.
Yeah. And in that, like, what are you like noticing between the experiences of men and women managers? I know that there's a lot of research
Yeah,
in how much more women do to support teams, right? Like, I feel
yes,
like we see that every year in
yes,
women in the workplace, and in this specific moment, how does
yeah.
that shake out? And I guess I'm really curious, like as women, what does that mean for our opportunities to grow in our career potential?
Yeah, it's it's so interesting because there's the annual Women in the Workplace research from Lean In and McKinsey, and that data showed this year that, or excuse me, for 2021, that women, as compared to men, tend to lead more empathetically. They're leaning in with more, no pun intended, with more of the care and support, emotional care and support of their teams, and well-being, and also helping them to manage through burnout. And so when you think about that, you think about how women are managing their teams through this moment, and also, you know, possibly navigating caregiving, and being caregivers. And so, managing the care and support, emotional support of their teams, caregiving at home, while also still striving in their careers. And you can see how that could be a recipe for potentially more women leaving the workplace, because of that, because of the stress of it, because of uh, limitations around career advancement. I think in most organizations, or in a lot of organizations, that, empathy, that leading with empathy still isn't exactly rewarded,
Hmm.
in major ways, right? We expect, of course, managers to lead their teams to outcomes, but do we also reward and recognize teams and managers who are supporting their teams emotionally, who are creating psychological safety and creating spaces where their teams can ask for what they need, and can, get relief, and manage that burnout. So, those are some of the differences, but those are also some of the needs that you could see that women who are managing teams will need in this environment. They need better support. They need better support for themselves, as well as better support for their teams to manage through this moment.
What is that like? What does that self advocacy really look like? Because I have been hearing a lot of managers talk about feeling so squished in the last 2 years,
Yeah,
where yeah, they are trying to support their teams. And I think as managers and as women, I think a lot of times what we do is we say, hi, you can have a 30 or 40-hour work week. And what
yeah,
that looks like then is like I'm sitting and working until midnight and then up early at 6 a.m.
yeah,
So that the work doesn't get disrupted, right? And
yeah,
because we're never rewarded. We're never rewarded for taking care of our people. We're rewarded for deliverables.
yeah.
So in what ways do managers like get the support they need from leadership? Like how should they be advocating for themselves?
This is such a great question, because this is often something that, people managers often struggle with. You are in that mid spot, and focused on, yes, holding your team accountable for outcomes, but also sometimes providing a layer of protection. And so, one, people managers have to be courageous in asking for what they need, and this has to be a continuous and ongoing conversation, not a one-off. Just, hey, here's what I'm thinking might be helpful. But what I would encourage managers to do is to frame it as, you know, I, along with my team, we are, working through this moment in time that's really difficult, doing my best to manage the burnout. Um, this is what I think I need, and I want to come back to you when that changes, because it will
Mhm.
change, and set the expectation that it will change because your needs will vary. One week it might be X, another week it might be something else. And so, being courageous and asking for the things that you need, and also setting up conversations around those needs so that they are a continuous conversation. Your boss, your boss's boss knows that this is, you're going to keep coming back because things will change for you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this, and you can say,
Yeah.
no, I won't answer, but I'm curious, like,
Mm.
have you seen this done well anywhere? Like, is
Mm.
there an organization or a team that you've either supported or worked with where you've seen leadership really listen to a manager's advocacy and say, yeah, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to burn you out. I'm going to manage your workload, which I guess is just like a nice way of saying you can do less.
Well, and say not less, but let's be realistic about deadlines, right? So yes,
Mhm.
in I'll say pre-COVID or pre-pandemic times, right? Maybe, and it's not to say that real deadlines were realistic before, and
Mhm.
now they're even more so. If they were unrealistic, now even more so. And even if they were realistic previously, now we need to reset because it takes
Mhm.
more time. We just have less mental capacity because of everything that we're going through. So, being able to name that, to say, for example, and I'll name one organization that I think does this well, and I'd be what one organization that does this well, Lean In, actually.
Okay.
And I'm naming them because of a post that the COO recently made. I want to say it was January or February of this year. And it was in support of the SKIMS, daily SKIMS, show your leave policy. And they detailed, what they offer for their leave. And the COO detailed this, but also detailed how they help their employees to recover and restore after intense project time. So what the COO shared was that they have, after a really intense project or that's been delivered, intense period of work, they have time that they ask employees and encourage employees to set aside as a policy, to go and, take time to recoup, to recover. That, that seems really innovative. That, yes, we're acknowledging that after a really intense period of work, that you will probably need some time to go, and just some extra time to go rest, to go, fill your cup, to do the things that you need to do that will help you to come back, in the next week or whatever the time period is, that will help you come back and be ready to go again. That we just can't work on this endless continuous loop of just moving from one big deliverable or one big project to the next, that people need recovery time in between. I think that's really amazing that it's, and specifically that it's policy, right?
I love that. I mean, I think it also signals that people managers aren't robots that live in isolation. I think, part of the challenge of being a people manager often is that, yeah, you're doing that for your job, but you also have a home life, right? Most of
Yes.
us have families that need us. We might have kids, we have spouses, partners, right? And when you are coming off of this intense period of work where like your partner was likely doing a little bit extra to make the house work or the house run, that you also like your relationships also need a little bit of like caretaking after that period.
Yeah. So do you. You need
Yeah.
some caretaking. You need some let me go and do some things that bring me joy, that help me refuel. What you mentioned about relationships, often for me when I'm really busy, that I feel like I'm neglecting my family and my kids. So
Hmm.
having time in that way would allow, someone like me to say, I get to go spend some time with my kids and I get to also go spend time and do something just for myself as well. Right. So I
Hmm.
think it really is, if you've got policies, and these are things that people managers can design themselves to say, for example, we have no meeting Fridays. And this is the time for people to close out their work. And this is a, policy or practice for our team.
Hmm.
We have specific periods where we consider these periods of limited meetings, or where the team is away. So we're going to give 2 weeks, right? We're going to give 2 weeks. We know that this has been a really intense period. We're going to go dark, so to speak, for 2 weeks or a week,
Hmm.
whatever it is. That kind of intentional practice policy really can help your team and help to manage the burnout for both you and your team.
Yeah, I love that. I can name an organization as well. It's they're called Thorn, nonprofit
Yeah,
organization, and at multiple times a year they close their offices for a week.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's pretty incredible. Or like Thanksgiving, they gave everybody the whole week off because that's when you're most likely to take your vacation. And so not having people dip into their vacation, just closing it down.
Yes, I know a few companies that have similar policies. At the end of the year, they'll usually close in that break period around Hanukkah and Christmas. So
Mhm.
around the last like 2 weeks of the year, I think those are, having that org wide is that really helps people, because not it's not just you away returning to an inbox with hundreds of emails that you've now got to get through in a couple of days. It's, hey, this is a time for everybody to take time.
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna work on doing that for our team this year. So
Yeah,
tune back in 3 months and see if I was able to make that possible. I have sort of one last question
yeah,
for you, and it's a little bit around work-life balance, which is not a term that I love,
hmm,
because it pulls up pictures of like women soaking in bathtubs with flower petals, which feels honestly really unrelaxing to me personally. When you've been a manager, what did you do to de-stress? What did you do to like find joy in those really tough
yeah.
moments, those long work weeks?
uh, so one practice that I still keep up with regularly, and it's changed shape a little bit. But one of the things that I did was to start making and keeping a gratitude list as well as a work win list. And I had a career coach who encouraged me to take part in the practice for a week, and it was something that stuck with me. I had maintained a gratitude practice years before, but my coach helped remind me of the benefits of it, and also celebrating and honoring the wins. And that was one way, maintaining those lists. So I would, every at least a couple times a week, I'd sit down and just write down, what are the things that I want to celebrate that went well this week, or that were successes, big, small, whatever they were. And the gratitude, what are some of the things that I'm grateful for? Um, Keeping those and having that, was really powerful, to be able to, and helped me to stay in joy, because I could name those things that I was grateful for, that I had gratitude around. And seeing it in print does something. That's how you sustain. That's how you sustain joy in a really meaningful way. Um, for me, it was also just seeing my as a people manager, as a leader, and specifically as a Black woman, the importance of managing a team and having team members who acknowledge that. One of the my former directs, texted me in the last few months and said, you were the first Black manager I ever had, and it stopped me in my tracks because I just what does it mean to be someone's first Black manager that they've ever had? I
Mhm.
think there's a duty of care there, but it's also significant to me in being able to really have an impact on someone to be someone's first Black manager.
That's I feel like I'm tearing up because as I hear
Yeah,
you say that, I've never had a person of color who's been a manager ever.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
only ever had white women managers,
yeah,
and yeah, that cultural divide,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
big. It's
yeah,
really, really big.
yeah. So
Um,
no, no, no. I love this arc in our conversation because I've been fortunate to have diverse managers across gender, race, ethnicity, but of course fewer Black women managers, and I recognize just the importance in that of supporting and, like you said, that cultural fluency that exists between you all.
yeah, it's so desperately needed, and I feel like I actually want to draw the thread through for anybody that's listening. Part of the reason why we want to take care of our managers and avoid burnout is there are already such few people of color and women of color specifically that are managers, and we need them to keep our workforce healthy because of the ways in which they're able to relate and care. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in this moment, like, we can't afford to have people dropping out of the workforce, like these really important culture keepers and culture
Yeah.
makers inside of our organizations.
Yeah, that again, going back to the research shows that they're doing and leading more strategic and programmatic DEI work within organizations, that they're
Mhm.
often leading in that space. They're often called upon to be leaders, and they're also feeling less supported,
Yeah.
right? And so we need organization. I'm saying organizations
Mhm.
really have to, you know, deepen their support of women of color, of underrepresented people managers, and make sure that yes, that they have what they need, specifically what they need, not just what a people manager generally speaking needs, because that
Mhm.
default is likely white and male, but what does this specific person need as they navigate the organization as a woman of color, as a person of color?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for joining us from an airport lounge
yeah,
on the way to a conference. This was such I mean, this conversation just brought so much for me as a people manager myself and supporting clients that are people managers as well. Katrina, thank you so much.
thank
For
you.
anybody listening, connect with her on LinkedIn. You post amazing
Thank
resources.
you. Thank
Sign
you.
sign up for her newsletter. It's really good, and she doesn't blast you with 30 of them in a week. So thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye.
Bye.